And thank you, all of you, for being here today. The difficulty that obviously a lot of us face on all sides of the immigration issue is not conflating refugee resettlement with visa waiver, with border security, with the larger immigration issue. I think many times we tend to get all of that confused. However, here we're talking about specifically a vulnerability. Second only to the open border that we have in ways that people could infiltrate, the visa waiver program constitutes probably the greatest threat for infiltration if you were trying to enter the United States to do nefarious activities. In a simple yes or no, would you agree or disagree with that statement, Mr. Kerlikowske?
I would not agree with it, no.
Ms. Johnson?
I would not agree as well.
Ms. Vaughn?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Mr. Ottolenghi?
So would I.
Mr. Heifetz?
I disagree.
Okay. And see, therein lies the problem, because even in the refugee camps that we visited, even as we've traveled into some very dangerous places to look at a lot of different things, even they will build up their border so that we have a controlled entry. Now, visa waivers, we have control, and I hear cited here today that it is the ESTA that is far more stringent and it's far more thorough, and therefore we should have some reassurance. Ms. Johnson, how long is the ESTA legitimate for?
I believe it's 2 years. It's good for 3, and it can go down to 1.
So 2 to 3 years. So do you think that maybe someone could be in a different viewpoint in terms of nefarious activity over a 2-year period?
Well, just like our visas, the ESTAs are currently vetted, so it's not a static moment in time. So just because you're issued an ESTA does not mean we don't continually look at you as.
Well, I understand that, but unless the information is volunteered, such as a change of address or some other nature, the ESTA is good for 2 years. And you know, whether or not I am coming here to visit Disneyland or coming here to commit an act of terror, we don't know. And see, here's part of the problem. Now, I'm not conflating the refugee resettlement and some of those. Look, we need to be a nation that welcomes immigrants. I just want to be on the record for that. However, what we're talking about here is a vulnerability to infiltration. And as someone who defended my country in uniform for more than 2 decades of my life, living among many of the places that we're talking about, by the way, which have very good people, we are vulnerable. And yet, Mr. Heifetz, let me see if I'm correct here. You say, as part of the JCPOA, though, the United States committed to refrain from creating new types of sanctions on Iran. More specifically, the U.S. agreed to refrain from, quote, imposing exceptional or discriminatory regulatory and procedural requirements in lieu of the sanctions and restrictive measures covered by the JCPOA. So am I hearing you correctly that modifications to the visa waiver should be avoided because it might curtail Iranian business? Yes or no?
No, that's not what I was saying.
But that's in multiple statements, to include your recorded testimony. You do state that we should avoid that because it might be discriminatory or exceptional. Do you believe that it's discriminatory or exceptional to have an additional scrutiny on Iranian people conducting Iranian business?
I believe that we have to be very careful about the exercise of VWP privileges and the withdrawal of those VWP privileges, and that we need that it is in the United States' national security interest to ensure compliance with the JCPOA.
Well, okay, but that's a whole separate issue with the joint agreement. In fact, let's talk about trading allies. Our top 20 allies, GDP, okay, China, Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, these are in the top 20 trading partners. We're talking a lot of money, hundreds of billions of dollars in trade, the United States. They're not on the visa waiver program. Are you suggesting, sir, that Iran should be treated more favorably, or those that do business with Iran, than, say, if I were a Londoner and I visited Malaysia?
No.
Are you suggesting that I ought to get favorable attention because I'm going to Iran as opposed to our allies that we trade hundreds of billions of dollars with?
The U.S. security depends in large part on cooperation from, among others, European allies. And if we threaten withdrawal of VWP privileges from citizens of those countries, that's something that has to be factored into
Well, I
the
agree,
calculation.
and I understand a little bit about security and providing security to the United States, having nearly lost my life in defense of the country. How would requiring additional screening and on a visa application for those conducting business in Iran be any different than, say, exceptions to conduct business with Saudi Arabia? Do you favor Iran over Saudi Arabia?
I'm not taking any position on that.
Well, I think
on
you
that
are,
issue.
sir. I think you are taking a position here
No.
with your testimony here today. And this is the point that I'm making. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. But we have to be very careful here. We have vulnerabilities. We want to be a nation that is welcoming. We have vulnerabilities. But as Mr. Ottolenghi correctly stated, this is not an additional burden. It is not so bad that we can't do it. And I think we need to be very careful before we open ourselves up to real danger and real vulnerability. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.